ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls. Welcome to Playing with Power MTG, where we play with the most powerful cards in the most powerful formats. Tonight's game is brought to you by TCGplayer.com, where you can find all of your cards online while still supporting local game stores. Dragon Shield for all the best accessories to protect your decks, and through Patreon, where you get awesome benefits for your direct support. For tonight's game, we are playing with our patron, Steven. He signed up to our Mox Pearl tier on Patreon and gets to play with us for this episode. If you want to play with us and be on an episode of Playing with Power, consider signing up to our Mox Pearl tier. Our Patreon offers tons of benefits, including Discord access with live streams, behind-the-scenes footage, raw gameplay, additional series, merchandise discounts, and archive footage of old games as well. We have tiers at all budgets, so sign up today. Now, let's start out by showcasing our fighters this evening. First, we have ZACK, piloting the partner pair of Tymna the Weaver and Tana the Bloodsower. This is a stacks deck that plays a lot of stacks to slow opponents. It grinds with Tymna to generate card advantage, and then finishes the game with a Kiki combo. His opening hand contains a Linvala, Keeper of Silence, Archon of Emeria, Mana Confluence, Elvish Mystic, Arbor Elf, Windswept Heath, and a Tarnished Citadel. Next, we have FOLGER, piloting Kenrith the Return King. This is a proactive deck built around Hermit Druid. One Hermit Druid activation is all it takes to win the game, and this deck is built entirely around that ability. His opening hand contains a Dockside Extortionist, Tainted Pact, Avacyn's Pilgrim, Steam Vents, Forbidden Orchard, Mystical Tutor, and his London Mulligan is a Dark Ritual. After that, we have Mike, piloting the partner pair of Kraum, Ludovic's Opus, and Tevesh, Doom of Fools. This is a proactive deck all about turboing out an ad nauseum as fast as possible, and has the ability to grind using its commanders. His opening hand contains a Command Tower, Spire of Industry, Notion Thief, Cabal Ritual, Deflecting Swat, Vampiric Tutor, and his London Mulligan is a Brainstorm. Finally, we have Steven, piloting Ashaya, Soul of the Wild. This is a proactive deck built around the combo of Ashaya and creatures that untap lands with their abilities. You can use that synergy to produce infinite mana and take advantage of it in numerous ways in mono green. His opening hand contains a Birds of Paradise, Misty Rainforest, Verdant Catacombs, Forest, Mox Diamond, Noxious Revival, and a Vitalize. Without further ado, let's begin this nasty, nefarious, noble, noteworthy, naive, nomadic negotiation. ZACK was able to hold his breath in the longest and gets to start us off. ZACK draws a card for turn and plays a Mana Confluence. He casts a Mana Crypt. He taps Mana Confluence and casts an Archon of Emeria. Everyone reevaluates their opening turn, and ZACK passes. FOLGER draws a card for turn and plays a Forbidden Orchard, tapped. He passes to Mike. Mike draws a card for turn and plays a Command Tower, tapped. He ships the turn to Steven. Steven draws a card for turn and plays a Forest. He casts a Mox Diamond, discarding a Misty Rainforest. He ends his turn. During his upkeep, ZACK loses his Mana Crypt flip and takes 3 damage. He draws and plays a Tarnished Citadel. He taps both Mana Confluence and Tarnished Citadel to cast Linvala, Keeper of Silence. He moves to combat and attacks Mike with Archon. Mike takes it and ZACK passes. FOLGER draws and plays a Steam Vents, tapped. He taps Forbidden Orchard, gives a Spirit Token to Steven, and casts an Avacyn's Pilgrim. He passes the turn. Mike draws and plays a Fiery Islet, tapped. He ends the turn. Steven draws and plays an Ancient Tomb, tapped. He ends this turn. During his upkeep, ZACK loses his Mana Crypt flip and takes 3 damage. He draws and plays a Scrubland. He taps Mana Confluence to cast his commander, Tymna the Weaver. He moves to combat and attacks Mike with Linvala and FOLGER with the Archon. Both take the hit, and in his second main phase, ZACK pays 2 life and draws 2 cards through Tymna. ZACK ends the turn. FOLGER draws, takes no game actions, and passes. At the end of FOLGER's turn, Mike casts Vampiric Tutor. In response, FOLGER casts Mental Misstep, countering Vampiric Tutor. Mike draws and plays an island. He ships the turn to Steven. Steven draws and plays a Forest. He taps Ancient Tomb to cast his commander, Ashaya, Soul of the Wild. He passes the turn. During his upkeep, ZACK wins his Mana Crypt flip. He draws and moves to combat. He attacks Steven with Archon, Mike with Tymna, and FOLGER with Linvala. They all take the hit, and ZACK gains 2 life. In his second main phase, ZACK pays 3 life and draws 3 cards through Tymna. He casts a Dark Confidant. ZACK passes, discarding to hand size. FOLGER draws and passes the turn. Mike draws and plays a Spire of Industry, tapped. He ends his turn. Steven draws and plays a Forest. He moves to combat and attacks ZACK with Ashaya. ZACK doesn't block and takes 5. Steven passes the turn. At the end of Steven's turn, ZACK taps Mana Confluence to flash in an Aven Mind Sensor. In response, FOLGER casts a Mystical Tutor. He fetches up a Ponder onto the top of his library. During his upkeep, ZACK loses his Mana Crypt flip and takes 3 damage. He reveals a Plains through Dark Confidant. He draws and moves to combat. He attacks FOLGER with Linvala, Mike with Aven Mind Sensor and Tymna, and Steven with the Archon. They each take the hit, and ZACK gains 2 life. In his second main phase, ZACK pays 3 life and draws 3 cards through Tymna. He plays a Plains. He casts Demonic Tutor. He fetches up a card into his hand and then passes the turn. At the end of ZACK's turn, Folger decides that killing ZACK is the best chance at victory, so he taps Forbidden Orchard and gives Steven another spirit token. ZACK discards a hand size, and the turn moves to Folger. Folger draws and casts Ponder. He looks at the top 3, rearranges them, and draws a card. He plays a command tower, tapped. He moves to combat and attacks ZACK with Avacyn's Pilgrim. ZACK takes it, and Folger passes. Mike draws and plays a Flooded Strand, tapped. He ends his turn. Steven draws and plays a Verdant Catacombs, tapped. He casts Occam Adversary. He moves to combat and attacks ZACK with 2 spirits and Ashaya. Before blockers, ZACK taps Mana Confluence to flash in a Village Bellringer. It enters, and then ZACK untaps all of his creatures. ZACK blocks Ashaya with Dark Confidant and the spirit tokens with Tymna and Linvala. Dark Confidant and the spirit tokens die, and ZACK gains 2 life. Steven ships the turn to ZACK. During his upkeep, ZACK wins his Mana Crypt flip. Still in his upkeep, Folger taps Forbidden Orchard, gives Steven a spirit, and casts Silence. Silence resolves, locking ZACK out of casting spells this turn. He draws and plays a Windswept Heath. He moves to combat and attacks Mike with Tymna and Aven Mind Sensor. Mike takes it, ZACK gains 2 life, and in his second main phase, ZACK pays a life and draws a card through Tymna. He passes the turn. Folger draws and plays a Godless Shrine, tapped. He ships the turn to Mike. At the end of Folger's turn, Mike taps Fiery Islet to cast Notion Thief. Mike draws, looks around the board, and passes. Steven draws and then cracks his Verdant Catacombs, paying a life and searching the top 4 cards of his library due to Aven Mind Sensor. He fetches up a forest onto the battlefield. He plays an Emergence Zone, tapped. He moves to combat and attacks ZACK with Ashaya and Occam Adversary. ZACK blocks Ashaya with Archon of Emeria. Before damage, ZACK cracks his Windswept Heath, pays a life, and fetches up a plateau onto the battlefield. He casts Fire Covenant, paying 7 life and targeting Ashaya and Notion Thief. In response, Mike casts Deflecting Swat. He changes the targets of Fire Covenant to deal 6 to Tymna and 1 to Avacyn's Pilgrim. Fire Covenant resolves, Avacyn's Pilgrim and Tymna die, and then they move to damage. Archon dives, and ZACK takes 2. Occam Adversary triggers, and Steven draws a card. In his second main phase, Steven casts Birds of Paradise. He ends his turn. During his upkeep, ZACK wins his Mana Crypt flip. He draws, and then taps Mana Confluence to cast Splinter Twin on his Village Bellringer. In response, Steven casts Vines of Vastwood, targeting Village Bellringer. The table can't get enough of the spicy play, and Vines resolves. Splinter Twin fizzles, and then ZACK follows up by playing a Bayou. He casts an Elvish Mystic. He casts a Serra Ascendant. ZACK passes the turn. Folger draws and casts a Deathrite Shaman. He ends his turn. Mike draws and casts a Jeweled Lotus. He cracks it and casts his commander, Kraum, Ludovic's Opus. He moves to combat and attacks Folger with Kraum. Folger takes it, and Mike passes. Steven draws and casts a Llanowar Elves. He moves to combat and attacks Mike with a Ashaya and a Spirit. Mike doesn't block and takes 11. Steven ends his turn. During his upkeep, ZACK wins his Mana Crypt flip. Still in his upkeep, he casts Noxious Revival, targeting Splinter Twin in his graveyard. Revival resolves, and ZACK puts Splinter Twin onto the top of his library. ZACK then passes priority in his upkeep, and Steven responds by casting a Noxious Revival of his own, putting Flooded Strand on the top of ZACK's library. ZACK draws and casts Yisan, the Wanderer Bard. Kraum triggers, and Mike draws. ZACK taps Mana Confluence to cast his commander, Tana the Bloodsower. He ships the turn to Folger. Folger draws, takes no actions, and passes. Mike draws and casts a Mox Diamond, discarding a Morphic Pool. He casts a Dark Ritual, making 3 black. He casts his other commander, Tevesh Zot, Doom of Fools. He activates Tevesh's first ability and creates 2 Thrall tokens. He ends his turn. Steven draws and moves to combat. He attacks ZACK with Ashaya, Llanowar Elves, Occam Adversary, and a Spirit. ZACK blocks Llanowar Elves with Linvala, Ashaya with Serra Ascendant, Occam Adversary with Tana, and the Spirit token with Yisan. Serra Ascendant, Tana, Llanowar Elves, and the Spirit all die. ZACK gains 1 life, and then Steven passes the turn. During his upkeep, ZACK wins his Mana Crypt flip. He draws and plays a Flooded Strand. He taps Mana Confluence to cast Splinter Twin, again targeting Village Bellringer. Splinter Twin resolves, and ZACK activates Village Bellringer's ability, creating a token copy with haste. It enters and untaps all of ZACK's creatures. ZACK activates Village Bellringer again. In response, Folger casts Chain of Vapor, targeting Notion Thief. So you might be asking, why would Folger target Notion Thief instead of Village Bellringer when the game was about to end? Folger makes this play because it removes a problem card for him, Notion Thief, and forces Mike to sacrifice a land to continue the chain in order to stop ZACK. This gives Folger essentially a 2-for-1 on his removal spell. Anyway, back to the game. Notion Thief returns to Mike's hand, and he continues the chain, sacrificing Flooded Strand and targeting Village Bellringer. Village Bellringer returns to ZACK's hand, and he also continues the chain. He sacrifices Mana Confluence and bounces his own Mana Crypt back to his hand. ZACK stops the chain and resolves the activation of Village Bellringer. He creates a second token copy, and with the ETB on the stack, he activates Yisan. He puts the first burst counter on him and fetches up a Deathrite Shaman onto the battlefield. Village Bellringer's trigger resolves, and ZACK untaps his creatures. He moves to combat and attacks Tevesh with his 2 Bellringer tokens. Mike blocks one of the tokens with Kraum, and Tevesh Zod takes 1. ZACK passes the turn. Folger draws and plays a Blood Crypt into play untapped, paying 2 life. He taps Forbidden Orchard, giving Steven a spirit, and casts his commander, Kenrith the Returned King. He ends his turn. Mike draws and activates Tevesh's second ability, sacrificing a Thrall and drawing 2 cards. He plays a Blood Crypt into play untapped, paying 2 life. He casts a Tainted Pact. He exiles until he finds a Wheel of Fortune and then puts the card into his hand. He taps Fiery Islet to cast Cabal Ritual with Threshold. He makes 5 black mana and then follows it up by recasting Notion Thief. He taps Spire of Industry to cast Wheel of Fortune. In response, Steven casts Vitalize and untaps all of his creatures. Wheel resolves, each player discards their hands, and then Mike draws 28 cards through Notion Thief. He casts a Mox Opal. In response, ZACK activates Yisan for 2. He fetches up a Collector Oof onto the battlefield. Mike casts a Lion's Eye Diamond. He casts a Chrome Mox, imprinting Dispel. Mike sculpts his hand and then passes, discarding to hand size. Steven draws and plays a Forest. He moves to combat and attacks Mike with Ashaya and Okaim. Mike blocks Ashaya with his Thrall and then takes the rest. Okaim triggers and he draws a card. Steven passes. At the end of Steven's turn, ZACK cracks his Flooded Strand, pays a life, and fetches up a Savannah onto the battlefield. During his upkeep, ZACK activates Yisan for 3. He fetches up a Ranger Captain of Eos onto the battlefield. Ranger Captain triggers, and ZACK fetches up an Avacyn's Pilgrim into his hand. He draws and casts Avacyn's Pilgrim. ZACK ends his turn. Folger draws and moves to combat. He attacks Mike with Kenrith. Mike blocks with Notion Thief, and Folger passes the turn. During Mike's upkeep, ZACK sacrifices Ranger Captain of Eos, stopping his opponents from casting non-creature spells this turn. It resolves, and Mike draws. He activates Tevesh Zot's first ability and creates 2 Thrall tokens. He casts a Gilded Drake. It enters, and Mike exchanges control of it with ZACK's Linvala. He plays a Watery Grave, tapped. Mike passes to Steven. Steven draws and moves to combat. He attacks Folger with Okaim Adversary and Mike with Ashaya. Folger doesn't block, and Mike chump blocks with a Thrall. Okaim triggers, and Steven draws. He ends the turn. ZACK draws and plays a Stomping Ground, tapped. He recasts his commander, Tymna the Weaver. He moves to combat and attacks Folger with Aven Mind Sensor. Folger takes it, and in his second main phase, Tymna triggers, ZACK pays a life, and draws a card. He passes the turn. Folger draws and casts a Lotus Petal. He moves to combat and attacks Mike with Kenrith. Mike chump blocks with a Thrall, and Folger passes. Mike draws and casts Reanimate, targeting Baron, Master Wizard, in his graveyard. Baron returns to the battlefield, and Mike loses 3 life. Mike activates Baron, sacrificing Spire of Industry and bouncing Collector Oof to ZACK's hand. He activates Tevesh Zot's second ability, sacrificing Kraum and drawing 3 cards. Mike loves his draws, and he plays an Exotic Orchard. He casts Underworld Breach. In response, Folger casts Pact of Negation. Mike responds by hard casting Force of Negation, countering and exiling Pact. Breach resolves, and Mike begins by cracking Lion's Eye Diamond for 3 red. He exiles 3 cards from his graveyard and escapes his Lion's Eye Diamond. He cracks LED for 3 blue. He escapes Brain Freeze from his graveyard and targets himself. Mike repeats the process of escaping LED, cracking it for blue, and then escaping Brain Freeze to mill his entire library. Mike then escapes a Thassa's Oracle from his graveyard. It resolves, and Mike wins the game. Ladies and gentlemen, what a great game. Congratulations to Mike on his win. He did a great job of striking at the perfect time and turned it into a win. A special shout out should be given to Steven on the very spicy play of Vines of Vastwood. Speaking of Vines of Vastwood, tonight's most valuable card goes to Vines of Vastwood. This card really isn't seen outside of mono green, but it is incredibly versatile and consistently overperforms. 1 green mana for a spell that can protect your things while also being able to stop some of the format's mainstream win conditions is amazing. Tonight's game really showed off the strength and versatility of this card. We are working on all kinds of new content, but we need your help. This content we make takes time and money to produce. Support from viewers like you is what enables us to bring this to the world. If you want to help out, consider signing up to Patreon, buying some merchandise at our store, or purchasing cards from the TCG Player links in the description. All of these help us bring this content to you, and you get awesome merchandise, cards at great prices, and cool Patreon perks. If you cannot help financially, liking this video, subscribing to our channel, and sharing these videos goes such a long way as well. Well, that about wraps it up for this episode. Tune in next time when we duke it out to see who will be king of the competitive EDH table. Thank you so much for watching, and we will see you next time. Alright, time for Patreon shoutouts. I'd like to give a shout out to J-Rock, Wayan, Spielrahu, Sparks, Zods, Dylan Becker, Philip Hickey, Sanguinolency, Matt Wingrove, Snarps the Klept, Fur Berglund, Rakeko, Nick, Dante, CZ, Baby Jeebus, Pyro, Trey Payne, Dark, Delphdriz, Noah Saldana, and Brad Tobin. Thanks a lot, everyone. Really appreciate it.